If you're an English fan and stayed up to watch the first few overs of the Ashes, then Mitchell Starc punched you in the eyeball and spat on your grave. And even with England doing predictable England batting after that, it was easy to look at what began as, some kind of a sign of the apocalypse.
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
Or even just a massive strategic mistake. England won the toss and they could have batted. And while the easy thing to do might be to point out that they still live in fear of Nasser Hussain, who won the toss and bowled at the Gabba. And that did happen. That was a very dramatic day. In fact, when Nasser sent Australia in, they made more runs on that one day than England did in the entire match. And to be fair, some experts looked at this pitch and thought both teams should have bowled first. Alan Border, who is the most Queensland man to ever not be born or grow up there, thought this looked like a first-class Gabba wicket, which are generally nothing like their more traditional staid Test cousins. And I could see that, but I also lived through Border's captaincy and his commentary. Border on the mic would say that, but Border on the ground is batting first every time and telling his guys to tough it out. We also know that Pat Cummins said, for whatever that is worth, that he also would have batted first. That I believe him. And the ghost of Nasser Hussain may not be the reason, but the Gabba does flatten out. But it certainly wasn't flat early on, because look at all the wickets. So let's look at all the wickets. According to Shane Warne, Rory Burns received a straight leg stump half volley and missed it. But there was a bit more happening there. Burns moved right across the stumps, showing his leg, and the ball swung. It actually swung quite a lot. It was hurtling down the leg side, and more often than not, even with Burns moving too far across, that ball just ends up flying harmlessly down the leg side. And if that happened, everyone would have been talking about how Starc has to get his line right pretty damn quick. Instead, it's a wicket, and it was somewhere between a Yorker and a half volley, but it didn't York him. He stepped past it, and it snaked around his leg. It also quite clearly wasn't the pitch. Of course, when you decide to bowl first, swing also comes into that. But there really wasn't much movement at all in the air today. Just kind of that ball and a couple of others. There is an element of fluke, luck and poor technique that ended up with Burns looking back at his broken stumps. First ball. Australia did not attack the stumps much. In fact, looking at the beehive, it almost feels like they were trying not to. And you can see how many of these balls were going over the top. The bounce was very trustworthy from the start. Josh Hazlewood delivered an angled ball across Milan. And it was the kind of ball that in the 90s, Curtly Ambrose and Glenn McGrath got a lot of wickets with. But it's not as common now, partly because players do leave the ball a lot more. Partly because players started leaving that ball alone a lot more. Dawid Malan played it. It would be wrong to say that it did nothing off the pitch, but it didn't do a lot. It didn't seam violently or bounce unpredictably. This is a pretty standard ball to face early on in an Australian test. And Malan nicked it. Hazlewood's first spell was kind of wrong. 6 overs, 3 maidens, 3 wickets, 2 runs. But while Malan's wicket exposed England's better players to the morning session, it was the Root dismissal that was the best. It was just a perfectly placed wobble ball. Angled in, moving away, and Root nicked it. It didn't go extravagantly, just enough. And there was no way that Root could have comfortably left it, or would have known which way it was going to go. Hazlewood was in the middle of a you can't touch this spell, and Root was gone. Australia got Stokes on the back foot. They clearly didn't want him driving, especially as he was walking down the wicket to their bowlers. So they worked him over from a hard length. The exact ball that dismissed him doesn't appear to do much when you have a look at it with the naked eye. But Crickfist said it seemed 1.7 degrees, which at that length is a fair trip. But the fact that with the naked eye it doesn't look like it has straightened that much, again lets you know that it wasn't an unplayable dramatic ball, just a good test delivery that was challenging. His feet tell you that it squared him up. But while it's a top ball, it's not like the pitch made it unplayable. As Trent Copeland showed, Pat Cummins bowled 2 balls that landed on a near identical line and length when he was bowling to Hamid. The second one was delivered from wider on the crease and yet still moved further away from the batter. And it's that second one that makes him play. Not just that ball, but other balls that come after it. It's angle and just a slight movement from the wobble ball that makes Hamid unsure. There will be people that think that he should have left that. And in truth, Hamid probably thinks that too. But while Australia didn't bowl many deliveries that were actually hitting the stumps, Cummins and Hazlewood angled in a lot. And they made the batters feel like they had to play. That and just a little sideways movement was enough to get Hamid. Butler played a fantastic innings before Stark bowled superb delivery that bounced and left him a little. It was so good, even Shane Warne couldn't find any fault with it. And after that, Pope tried to pull Cameron Green and the ball got a top edge. Perhaps both of these just seem a little bit like tall bowler Gabba pitch type wickets. Stark's ball did a bit and obviously bounced, and maybe the angle helped the most. And Green's wicket was either bounce or a lack of execution or concentration from Pope. The rest was the tail. It would be hard to look at all that individually and decide that batting first was the issue. Batting poorly was the issue. Good bowling was the issue. This wasn't a 147 all-out wicket unless someone bowls really bad and a lot of the batters go out. And I think we can prove this. Cricinfo have something called control factor, where they rate each ball on whether the batter was hitting it where they wanted to, or in some cases, whether the batter was even hitting it. Last 3 years in Tests, batters have been out of control 17.1% of the time. In Australia, that was 16%, which makes sense as the wickets are still generally quite true there. In this particular game, it was 18.6%. So that makes it a slightly more difficult pitch, but not nuclear. England were bowled out because Australia bowled well and England aren't great at batting. Maybe they should have bowled first, but perhaps Australia would have been 4 wickets down and that would have looked like a mistake. The bigger error here is the decline of an entire generation of England batters and turning up to face Hazelwood, Stark and Cummins with that lineup. A collapse on day one is always going to seem more apocalyptic than any other, but this one was barely discernible in the world of English collapses and mistakes. The only real difference is the timing. First day of the Ashes, first ball of the Ashes, and dance around your legs. That ball didn't get magical assistance from the pitch, and even though it swung, it was still a leg side half volley. And if you think about it, the ball that wasn't helped by the pitch was the most dramatic moment all day. I'm not sure England made a mistake with the toss. It's just that Australia got a lot right and England got a lot wrong.